Hi, it's your friend Phil, Project Management Trainer and Coach. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mary Neville, my colleague and fellow project management professional. Mary has spent over 2 decades across various industries managing projects in software, commercial real estate, property management, and she's also been a small business owner. So, over the next number of weeks, we're going to be hearing from her about how she has applied project management tools and techniques that she learned about, and also a lot of the project management professional syllabus information that we know about. We're going to learn how she applied these to business and projects of all types. So, welcome, Mary. Over to you.
Hello and welcome. In this session, I'm going to share how I've applied my knowledge in real-life projects. We're going to start with an introduction. I'm going to give my background because I'm going to pull from my work experience as we talk through all the project management areas. We'll start with an overview. I'm going to quickly go through process groups, organizational structures, project life cycles, and more before we delve deep. And we're going to delve deep into the knowledge areas. We'll cover the scope, schedule, cost, etc. We're going to go through planning these areas and managing all of these knowledge areas. So let's get started. First, I'd like to introduce myself and quickly go through my background. I began a management career in the mid-90s and started with property management. I moved from property management into commercial real estate, and that was a very natural progression for me. However, my passion was in technology, and so I ended up in a software company, and that's where I became a project manager. I also opened my own business, a brick and mortar store, an e-commerce store, and I've authored a children's book and recorded a children's song to accompany the book. I'd like to share my favorite quote because it's highly related to project management. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I know that's a funny quote, but it's such a true quote. I printed this up and had it at my desk for many, many years and would reference it quite often. My motto is that every problem has a solution. My expertise is in risk management, and I love solving problems, but more so, I loved preventing them. Having the foresight for that was critical. All right, let's get started. First, we'll talk about organizational structure. Functional organization is where there's a functional manager and they have a specific area that they're over. They can create their own processes, they manage their own projects, and there's project-oriented where the project manager would be the boss and would manage many people under them, all the people within the project team. And then there's matrix. And I belonged to a balanced matrix organization. And with that, I was the project manager. And I did have the authority over my project, decision making over my project. But there was also a functional manager that was over the project team. And that worked really, really well in the industry I was in. I was in we were building the student information system, highly integrated, many products within a very large product. So it was highly complex, and it really worked to be in a balanced matrix. I was able to have a relationship with all the functional managers. We collaborated and put ideas and brainstormed, and I was still able to influence and mentor the project team members. And so it worked out really well. I think if the lines of communication are open and you talk often and bring issues up together, and are honest about things, I think that organizational structure worked really well for us. So, with that, we'll move on to process groups. There's initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So first, initiating is always first. Every project has a beginning and an end. You'll hear that time and time again in your education and prep for your PMP. If you're working on something and it doesn't have a defined beginning or end, then it's not really a project. It's more of an operational type thing. So with that, my experience has been that planning, executing, and the monitoring and controlling go in a cycle. So as soon as there's a change and you go through that change process, many times those changes impact the plan. So you have to go back and replan, and that can impact how you execute. So those went through cycles depending on what changes came through. But the closing and the initiating were always at the beginning and end for me. In the initiating process, I was given an approved business case. Project manager would have it approved through the chief executives. And then I would determine whether we had one or multiple projects or one or multiple programs that would satisfy that business case. And we would move on from there. And that's how we started. We would do the project charter. In the planning phase, when you're learning about, all of what's included in the planning phase, part of that is identifying your team. But honestly, for me, that happened prior to the planning phase. So we would have our team identified. They may not be able to start with me right away, but they'd be identified so that I could bring them into the initiation process. And we could all review the business case together so they could understand the big picture from what their project was a part of and feed into the project charter that I created so that they could give input into it and review it. So that's kind of how we worked. And then the closing was your typical having a retrospective and all of closing out, making sure your documents were available for future reference and no issues were outstanding, and that the business case, that part of it, if it was one project out of multiple, was satisfied. So then there's the project life cycles. There's predictive, which is like waterfall, iterative. You have monthly releases. You've got iterations likely. And then incremental, delivering a chunk of work without delivering the whole product. And adaptive and hybrid. And I worked in an agile environment, and we used the Scrum methodology. So we would have 2-week sprints. We'd have a product backlog versus our sprint backlog. We'd do release plannings, daily stand-ups, and at the end we'd have a sprint review and sprint planning session. And we would do retrospectives every 2 weeks. Are there any processes that need to change? Is everything working for you? Are there any tools that you need that you don't have? Has anybody not answered any of your questions? All of that kind of stuff. What have we learned in the last 2 weeks? Do we need to change something? So we would have that every 2 weeks. So I have this image here. One of the things is sometimes when you go into a project, you have to determine what kind of life cycle you're going to use for your project. What is your project life cycle going to look like? And I have this, but there's actually a lot of factors. In this diagram, we show the change and delivery. So if you have a lot of change and you deliver quite often, Agile might be a good method to use. If you don't deliver very often and you don't have a lot of changes, perhaps predictive would work for you. And those are two things to consider, but there are a lot more considerations, such as the nature of your company is definitely one consideration, but what is your deliverable? Do you have a regulatory item? If you do, then you may need the predictive type of life cycle because there might be certain requirements and they have to be spec'd out ahead of time. Or if, let's say you have a medical device that's critical to life or death, or a software that helps an airplane land, those are quite critical and may require very detailed requirements ahead of any work being done and may not be able to deliver chunks at a time. It really depends on the nature, the team, the company, and how you deliver your product or service. So the PMP Triangle came out a couple of years ago, and I was really happy with it because, number one, continuing education is balanced, and that's great. But the second reason is the recognition that the project management professional is well balanced and has these qualities. So I know that I have to utilize the technical, strategic, business management, and leadership qualities on almost a daily basis. So with the technical, obviously the agile practices, because I did say that we were an agile company. But, the life cycle management definitely was a big part of my role, and as well as requirements management and traceability. However, there's more than that. It's any documentation. So the test plans and requirements plans and end user documentation, all of that had to be managed and traceable. The risk management and schedule management, and then with the strategic business management, many of those qualities are required in order to be able to ask the right questions. That's what I found. You need to understand the industry, the standards, regulatory compliance, market awareness, and the operational functions in order to ask the right questions, understand who your stakeholders are, and be able to strategize and plan properly. And then the leadership is highly important for every project manager. If you don't have the leadership skills, then the team may not be productive and there may not be the communication that you would hope for. And so it's really important to have good leadership skills. And I found that as I worked as project manager, that mentoring and influencing and problem solving and building up the team and listening, just listening, and listening really identifies problems, predicts potential conflicts, and helps know what kind of coaching or mentoring might be needed. So I was really happy that this came out. It's really important to understand all three of these areas, no matter what type of project management you do, because going through the details of what's included in these, and you can find that, you could go on the PMI website and look at each one of these so that you can see if there's any gaps or things it could help you look at what types of continuing education classes you might want to fill those gaps and grow as a project manager. So I really appreciated this, and it's really helped me. So one other thing I wanted to cover Lastly, as far as the overview goes, are the tools. And although it's not related to getting your PMP certification, I think it's an important part of the overall project management to have tools that are transparent, consistent, and provide clear communication. So we have so many documents to either create or manage, and there's the project plan, the schedule, tracking issues. There's all kinds of documents. You have your change logs, your risk register, and just various documents. And I have found through my experience that internal stakeholders really value being able to access this information right at their fingertips. So we started out using Microsoft Project, having a project plan, but then we had to transfer it to, try to transfer it to a different program so that it was visible internally, and it became difficult. So we actually moved away from using that and going with a system that provided everything, and it was online. You could access it anywhere on any device. It included the timelines, the schedules, all the tasks, the information on problems that are happening, this project status updates, all of the documentation, all accessible from one point and consistent. And so I just wanted to bring that up because that was many years of pain getting to that point, and I highly recommend you can research products that would be highly integrated to bring all that together. And it worked really well, and people knew where to get the information, and that saves the project manager time because you're not constantly answering phone calls or emails asking questions before you're ready to send out a status update. And it makes you reliable to all of your internal stakeholders because they can get the information they need when they need it.
And that concludes this initial introduction. Next, we'll be talking about scope management.